Hi there, everyone. This is the look-see for January 15th, 2026. And it's a little bit late, but man, there's been a lot of things happening here on the farm. Everybody's been sick except me. Lots of stuff. Oh my. So anyway, we're getting it out there. And it's long this year or this month because there's so much happening. There's so many things happening. So the new year started with a bang, and it looks like all the commentators and astrologers were correct in saying that things are going to be very different this year. Mm-hmm. Part of the commotion is that the globalists spent at least 50 or 60 years putting together a world that would give them complete control over governments, economies, and people's lives. And that system is now being shredded. 50 or 60 years is an entire lifetime for a lot of people. It's all they've ever known. So it's upsetting when things change, especially change so dramatically. So now we have a whole new way of doing the world coming at us. And that world is taking shape, but you can't see much of it yet because there's so much uproar going on due to the shredding of the old. So just hang in there. Those of us that are close to 80 years old we've seen the whole cycle. It's kind of like having several children, years apart. By the time you get to that last one, you can see all the mistakes you made with the first one. And that's kind of what we're seeing as we look at the world. It's like, oh, that doesn't work. Oh, that should have been different. Yeah. So just hang in there. And don't freak out over things that are just temporary stages of change and development. I started this look-see by asking for a keyword for the next 4 or 5 weeks, and I instantly got the word railroad. There's many, many ways to look at this word. If we look at the word as two words put together, we have rail and road. And a rail can be a bird. It can be like a wooden or a metal bar fixed to a wall that you hang on to when you're going down the stairs. And to rail against something is to complain bitterly about it, just really complain. So if we put the two words back together and take the whole word as it is, we have the familiar set of rails, used to build railroad tracks. We have a concept of a form of transportation, railroad. And we have the idea of railroading someone or something as if to manipulate or coerce in some way, usually to get what we want, regardless of what others want, or to obstruct certain options, or maybe even avoid an unwanted outcome. So since this is our keyword for the next few weeks, we might assume we're talking about a handrail and ask, well, what are we hanging on to or railing about as we go down the economic stairs? Perhaps we should ask, how are we being railroaded? What is it we are allowing ourselves to be distracted from? This keyword could also mean that there will be some bitter complaints about fast-moving changes that we don't have time to reflect on or comment on. We may be on a railroad, where things are happening too quickly to adapt to. Then there is the option to see that keyword as a practical message regarding, let's say, something noteworthy happening around the railway business. So as we move through the days between now and mid-February, we might be on a fast-moving train carrying us into a world where there are lots of things that are different, and we can see this as something to learn from and be excited about, or something to cry over and fight about. Take your pick. So with that, let's take a look and see what's going on around us in this very interesting world. Oh, wow. One, January used to be the month when we would get a State of the Union report. So I thought I would start with my own State of the States report. And there's good news and bad news. The bad news is that serious fraud, in fact, that might even be a theme for this whole look-see, fraud, because there's serious fraud, money laundering, trafficking, and drug operations that have been going on in a lot of states across the U.S. And I keep seeing that many more locations are going to be uncovered. The good news is that this kind of corruption is finally being addressed and hopefully ended, or at least reduced to a dribble. 2, the information coming out of Minneapolis is jaw-dropping. Oh, wow. And all eyes have been on Minnesota and the Somali community, but similar kinds of corrupt organizations are being exposed in a number of other states: Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, California, Mississippi, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, and others. Could probably throw Colorado in there too. Tons of narcotics, thousands of children captured for trafficking, hundreds of millions of dollars being paid out to buy serious weapons, and the cooperation of hundreds of lawyers, judges, police, and city officials inside the legal system who have been arrested as part of these fraud schemes. Wow. Nursing homes, child care centers, trucking companies, medical centers, car repair businesses, and others have been used as fronts for drugs, trafficking, and money laundering. In one particularly sad case, in Arizona, a drug and trafficking ring was kidnapping young women and selling them for $20,000 to $40,000 a piece, sort of as a side gig, while also moving drugs into the country on a massive scale. An Arizona judge who was in charge of cases having to do with missing persons was not only being paid to dismiss the cases, she had a false floor in her garage that opened to an underground passageway that went for miles out into the desert. This is where the young women were hidden before being sold, and drugs also moved through these passages. Another operation uncovered was a string of almost 70 nursing homes across Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, and Louisiana. Maybe Mississippi. I'm not sure about Mississippi, but these nursing homes were taking in elderly people and then not taking care of them at all, because the nursing homes were just fronts for drug and money laundering operations. Old people take lots of drugs, so hardly anyone paid attention to the fact that a doctor was being paid to sign off on huge drug shipments to these places. When they were raided, authorities found elderly patients hooked up to intravenous drugs that were strong enough to kill them, after which the nursing home would continue to collect money from the government by not reporting the death. Huge drug stashes were found, along with hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars. Is this what our capitalist system has come to? Is this what happens when money becomes the means of survival? Is this the result of competition instead of cooperation? Is this why our economy is falling apart and our country right with it? What has to change here besides the fact that everything is corrupt, and cleaning this up is going to cause major uproar in our communities? So buckle up, get ready. Number 3, I don't know if you've been following the story around the shutdown of California's San Pablo Bay pipeline, but a big problem is now unfolding that does not have easy answers. Last month, on December 15th, 2025, the San Pablo pipeline shut down permanently. They were losing $2 million a month. This level of loss is not something that anybody can sustain. The San Pablo pipeline was sending crude oil from Bakersfield to the Bay Area refineries, then supplied Northern California with gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, and they have been doing this for 70 years. A volume gradually decreased, and they were sending only like 30,000 barrels per day instead of the 100,000 barrels per day that they were capable of sending. Their operating costs were $8 million a month, but their revenue was only $6 million per month. So that's where that $2 million loss came from. And they kept going for 36 months as they tried everything they knew to stay open and work with the governor's office to resolve their issues. The problem was that refineries were closing. Valero, big, gas and oil company, Valero was closing its Benicia refinery, is going to close that refinery in April of 2026. Marathon's Martinez refinery was already closed. Phillips 66 had already closed their Los Angeles refinery and then converted their Rodeo refinery to renewable diesel. There was still oil available to ship from Bakersfield, but not at a loss of $2 million a month. Railroads did not have the car capacity to handle that much oil. They just said, it's too much volume. We can't handle it. Trying to move it by truck would have resulted in ungodly numbers of trucks on the road, and the roads themselves would have needed constant repair from the wear and tear. Shipping it up the coastline by boat, they were quoted astronomical costs that nobody could afford. And finally, the pipeline shut down, cutting off 70% of California's crude refining. San Pablo was the state's main pipeline. And when they shut down, there was no backup. California crude is really quite heavy, and it needs special equipment and processes, as well as specialists who know how to maintain the pipeline and do the specialized processing at the refinery. So with the shutdown of that pipeline, billions of dollars are lost, and tens of thousands of jobs are disappearing. All the connecting businesses will fail. The pumping stations employing hundreds, the maintenance stations employing, I think they have specialized contractors, dozens of specialized contractors. Storage facilities that serve as distribution centers will also close. $40 million in upgrade loans will have to be written off. Small family oil producers are going to have to shut down. Insurance claims will skyrocket. Fuel shortages will begin, and gas prices will go up drastically. Gavin Newsom refused to take any action because he believed the oil refineries were manipulating prices and taking advantage of taxpayers. Wow, that's like the pot calling the kettle black. Governments don't have any room to be accusing others of manipulation and price gouging when their taxation is a form of price gouging that's been getting worse every year almost for the last 80 years. Perhaps Newsom wanted to be the only one manipulating prices. An interesting comment from Richard Lawson was California built their economy on oil. And then They made oil impossible to produce. In my view, this is a perfect example of governments clinging to idealistic dreams that are completely unrealistic, badly timed, and callous in terms of their people. How difficult would it be to envision new creative solutions to problems long before they become catastrophes in the personal lives of the population? Lack of vision is one of government's most serious shortcomings, and probably lack of courage is the second most serious. Number 4, the state of California. Let's keep going with California, because this is a saying, as California goes, so goes the U.S. Number 4, the state of California is having serious difficulties. Governor Newsom has created a series of really awful legislative rules that are bankrupting California. That major pipeline I was just talking about was supplying fuel to the northern half of the state. Now it's been shut down permanently. With the closing of refineries, the price of gas has gone up to over $8 a gallon. Another law requiring every gas station in the state to upgrade their underground gas tanks has caused hundreds of gas stations to simply close down. They can't afford the $2 million it would cost to replace all those tanks. And the fine for not doing so runs from $15,000 a day to $20,000 a day. And it's just not reasonable for gas station owners. New wage laws raising the minimum wage, we've all heard that, from $16 an hour to $20 an hour for all fast food workers were also put in place. And now those are beginning to kick in. So when they began to take effect, tens of thousands of jobs were lost. And the slow collapse of the California fast food industry began and still continues. Next, Newsom declared that if a trucking logistics company hired an independent trucker to haul a load, that trucker was now an employee of the logistics company. Being forced to suddenly take on all these truckers would cost the logistics companies millions of dollars, because they would have to set up payroll, collect and pay state and local taxes, get insurance, set up 401ks, pay Medicare and Social Security withholding taxes for each and every employee, and hire the necessary people or staff to handle all of that. So what was the response? Tens of thousands of truckers who had put anywhere from, say, $150,000 to $200,000 into their rigs and were already established as small businesses in control of their time, their life, and their money, said no. They began leaving California. They are still leaving in droves, by the thousands, tens of thousands. And this leaves the two big ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach without enough truckers to come and get the goods arriving at the ports, then carry them across the country. Now the shipping containers coming off those big ships from around the world are starting to pile up. If something isn't done to reverse the laws created by Newsom, the entire rest of the U.S. is going to see some serious shortages of everything and rising prices. A string of corporations have also begun to move out of California, poor California, cutting California revenue even further and taking top people with them. Oracle left without any notice, with no announcements, just moved. Boom. Not even giving California a chance to make some kind of deal or concession. I think they went to Austin. Last month, Apple, the phone, Apple announced it was moving to Texas, taking 36,000 employees and billions in tax revenue with it. I think they just finished maybe 5 years ago, a huge headquarter complex. And they spent billions on it. They're going to build the same thing in Texas for like 1/5 or 1/6 the price. Wow. In-N-Out, a major fast food chain in California, moved its headquarters to Tennessee. So between January of 2024 and December of 2025, last month, 47 major companies left California. Tesla, McDonald's, Realtor.com, GM, Ford, Honda, Charles Schwab, X, Chevron, Coca-Cola, PepsiCo, Walmart, Nestle, Hewlett-Packard, insurance companies, and many others either left or closed significant numbers of stores. Just closed them down. Some people say a retail collapse is underway, and things do not look good for California. And like I said, there's an old saying, as California goes, so goes the U.S. Number 5. When Trump went into Venezuela and brought home Maduro, I heard complaints from several directions saying this was a mistake, that Trump was expanding the wars, not paying enough attention to how people perceived him and the Republican Party, and therefore they were going to lose in the 2026 midterm elections. This is a valid point. However, if Trump stops to worry about what people think of him and starts to worry about vanity issues, he isn't going to get done what he needs to get done while he has the chance to do it. What he's doing is a demonstration of first things first. That's a rule in business and in life. First things first. What is the first thing that Trump said he was going to do? It was drain the swamp. I don't know what that means to other people, but in my mind, it means taking down the deep state and ending the kidnapping of people for human trafficking operations, ending the kidnapping of children for sex and adrenochrome operations, ending the money laundering that has infiltrated our legal system, and stopping, or at least slowing, the drug smuggling that has laced ordinary prescription pills with fentanyl, killing people unexpectedly who thought they were getting a prescription pain pill for a sprained ankle or some other temporary problem. Wow. Number 6. The mainstream media never puts the pieces together for anyone. But what I see is that the deep state is a 3-legged stool. Leg 1 is a group of Rothschild enterprises. They kind of all work together. Leg 2 is the big banks. And leg 3 is the cartels. These 3 have been working together to get complete control of the U.S. using tactics similar to those used by Great Britain against China in the Opium Wars of the early 1800s. For those who are not familiar with the Opium Wars, they began when Britain bought millions of dollars worth of tea from China and didn't have the money to pay their debts. They decided to set up some trade with China in the hopes that they could reduce their debt by having China buy something from them. China refused. They said they were self-sufficient and they needed nothing from Britain. So Britain then devised a plan to buy opium from India smuggle it into China, and get some demand going by addicting the Chinese population. It worked. And 30 years later, China was caught in a recession because the money going out was more than was coming in. So if the deep state is a cabal of Rothschild businesses, banks, and cartels, it was the businesses and banks that were all doing business in such a way as to look all legal and normal, a normal part of life. The cartels were handling the unsavory side of the business, the human trafficking, the drugs, and the money laundering. What does a cartel need most in its day-to-day operations? It needs banks. Now, banks have lots of KYC rules requiring them to know your customer, KYC, know your customer, in order to avoid handling money from illegitimate sources. Cartels are definitely illegitimate sources, and they pay big bribes to banks to get them to accept their money and look the other way. Cartels need banks that will transfer huge sums of money, no questions asked, wherever they are directed to transfer it. And when it comes to cartels, gone are the KYC rules that all the rest of us have to deal with. The deep state cabal of businesses, banks, and cartels were slowly building a globalist world in which they would control everything using money, drugs, and fear. Ukraine was their center for human trafficking, bioweapons, and drugs over in the Eastern Hemisphere. Venezuela was their center for human trafficking, drugs, control of elections. Let me say that again, control of elections and money laundering in the Western Hemisphere. Venezuela controlled elections in 71 countries around the planet. It looks to me like Trump went into Venezuela in order to cut off the financial legs of the deep state. So when I say he was doing first things first, I mean that it isn't going to do him any good to worry about the public image he and the Republicans have created for the 2026 elections if Venezuela is the one controlling the election results. So like I said, first things first. And it looks like draining the swamp is still the first thing on the list. Number 7, good news. Did you hear that 6 states, Alaska, Illinois, Kansas, Ohio, North Dakota, and Florida, are all working on plans to end property taxes for homeowners? Each state has a little different plan, but the idea is that people should no longer have to pay rent to the government in order to keep their property. I think this is a wonderful bit of news. So let's put some conscious energy behind that. Number 8. Did you hear or have you been following the story of Jeremy Clarkson and his refusal to sell his farm to Bill Gates? The farm is named Diddly Squat, which is about how much money farmers make these days. And this story may not change the world, but it is deeply inspiring to watch someone who can't be bought. Clarkson bought 1,000 acres of land in 2019 in Oxfordshire, England, and started farming. I think he was raising sheep. He wasn't making much money, so he started talking about his farming efforts on a TV show. He had a small TV show. It became popular. Bill Gates, who has already bought thousands of acres of farmland in the US, I think somewhere around 200,000 acres, decided that he was going to quietly buy British farmland as well. So using a whole bunch of shell companies, he started buying a lot of the farms around Jeremy Clarkson's farm. Then he made an offer to Clarkson. I think Clarkson may have ignored the first offer, but Gates didn't seem to get the message. The offers then increased in frequency and in amount. 20 million, then 35 million, then 45 million, then $50 million, offering Clarkson more than 3 times what the farm was worth. Clarkson refused the offer every time, and he continued to share what was happening on his farm, with his farm, on his TV show. And he wrote a column in the Sunday Times, so he would write, what was happening in that column as well. The TV show slowly became a huge hit with millions of viewers. When Gates couldn't get Clarkson to sell, he started building big agribusiness structures all around Clarkson's farm, which made farming difficult for Clarkson. Then Gates offered Clarkson a partnership. Come on, be my partner. Again, Gates was refused. It became a national conversation. Gates then upped his offer, 60 million, then 70 million. The answer was still no. Gates took a different tack and began to file complaints against Clarkson's farm management, his sheep operation, his use of water, whatever he could think of. They all failed in court, but they were a nuisance to deal with. And then Gates bought the local pub in town. Clarkson then decided he was going to open his own pub on his farm, and he called it the Peasants' Revolt. And he also served a dish called Billionaire's Comeuppance. By January 2025, Gates had purchased 40,000 acres of British farmland, creating a corporate network of farms. Clarkson then organized a coalition of farmers who created petitions, and they went viral. Protests followed, and by February of 2025, the British Parliament ended up debating foreign ownership of British farmland and called for restrictions by overseas entities. Gates' lawyers argued for all they were worth, but the public was no longer willing to back down. People had a real concern about corporate control of the food supply. Then Bill Gates made a final, personally handwritten offer to Clarkson, 100 million pounds. But Clarkson took that letter, framed it, and hung it in his pub with the caption underneath, quote, "When billionaires think everything has a price." Then he replied to Gates, quote, "Mr. Gates, I know you're used to buying whatever you want, but diddly squat isn't for sale. Not for 100 million, not for $1 billion, because it's not about money. It's about principle. British farmland belongs to British farmers, not foreign billionaires building agricultural monopolies." At that point, Gates stopped making offers, and when a documentary came out that made him look bad, Gates accused Clarkson of being anti-innovation, anti-progress. Clarkson replied, saying he was not anti-innovation, he was anti-monopoly. Today, they're in a standoff. Gates refusing to quit, Clarkson refusing to sell. Clarkson stopped land grabs by foreign billionaires and became a symbol of integrity, principle, and food tradition that makes sense. Gates continues to work on his corporate agricultural model. When I look ahead, I see that Bill Gates has had a lot of fun throwing money around this lifetime, buying men and their minds, working hard to reduce the population on the planet and increase the control of land in order to get control of food. Certainly, people cannot survive without food. And having control of the food supply is the perfect foil for reducing population. However, Gates will be long gone and is not likely to see his corporate food plans come to fruition, partly because the time for big corporations is coming to an end, and partly because people can be pushed in many directions, but they don't tolerate a lot of messing around with their food. I also worry sometimes about what Gates will experience when he gets to the next world and he experiences the crushing weight of feeling the results of what he caused other people to feel. That's one of the things you go through when you leave here. Number 9. I brought this up last month, but since we're looking at the state of our states and talking about food, let me remind you that the food system is slowly being revealed as another fraud. Big food companies are putting out products that look like food, but they're not. The body requires nutrition that only comes from real food. Otherwise, energy runs low, heads, hearts, and joints ache, lungs stiffen, arteries get rigid, digestion stops working, and the whole body starts to fall apart. Food is frequency. Fake, fraudulent food does not have the frequencies the body needs. Worse, these fake foods introduce foreign frequencies into the body that create problems and destroy whole systems. The digestive system is a frequent victim, as is the endocrine system, but the whole body is affected. Foods printed using 3D printers, plants and animals that have been injected with foreign DNA, and bioengineered products designed to look like food do not have the rich complex of nutrients, enzymes, and cofactors of real food grown in real soil in traditional ways. The people might be fooled, but the body isn't. It will eventually revolt and stop working. Number 10. Looking a little further ahead than just the next month, I see a whole wave of leadership changes, revolutions, and chaos across many of those 71 countries whose elections were controlled by Venezuela. Without Venezuela's intervention in election outcomes, new leaders chosen by the people are actually elected and put into office. But many of those leaders don't last. And that's because the time of nations is passing, and groups of people have learned a lot about what to look for in a leader, what to overlook, and what to immediately reverse. So we are in for some very interesting times when it comes to leaders and who is in charge. You know, as I was looking at this whole scene over the next few years, I was reminded of the comedy routine by Abbott and Costello known as Who's On First? It was hard to keep track of who's being put in place and who's being taken out. So, number 11. I noted that a lot of leaders watching Trump's moves in Venezuela were very quick to publicly criticize the moves and make threats like, he better stop. He better not try anything else. Who does he think he is? But in private, they were celebrating. It was sort of like, oh, thank God. Maybe now we can get moving in the right direction. So I'm not sure what to make of that, but at this point, I would say they know something that we don't know. Or maybe they're just celebrating being out from under the thumb of those who were controlling elections for the past 50 years. Either way you look at it, different peoples have goals and dreams. And you can't do that with a bad leader. You can't achieve those. Number 12. I heard people talking about Mexico being next on the list of countries forced to deal with corruption, but what I saw was that Cuba was next. A big change happens in Cuba. I wasn't sure of the timing. There might have been an attempt that failed, or there might be an attempt that failed, but a second attempt will be successful. I remember Fidel Castro's takeover of Cuba back when I was about 12. And the result was that the Cuban people became extremely self-sufficient in growing their own food and living sustainable lives with nothing but their own ingenuity to guide them. It was amazing. In some ways, Cuba has benefited tremendously. Number 13. Something odd is happening in China. Rivers and creeks that were once dry started flowing again, and not just a little bit. The reappearance of the creeks seemed to be welcome in some places, but large amounts of water also began gushing up through the ground in the middle of yards and gardens across 27 districts. So I went to look at this unusual appearance of water, and I ended up seeing what I thought was a large amount of magma under eastern and northern Russia, which was quite a distance away. But that magma was moving into areas it had not been in before. And this was creating intense heat and pressure that was forcing water and gases and even some magma to move through the subterranean landscape all the way down through China. I watched it and I thought, that does not bode well for the future. My impression was that big disruptions were coming in the form of an earthquake, perhaps a big volcanic eruption in eastern or maybe northern Russia, and water problems and flooding in Mongolia and China. Number 14. Number 14 is this: the foolishness of our leaders is becoming blatant. I was like, oh my gosh. Poland decided that it was going to seize control of a Russian pipeline called the Yamal-Europe pipeline, carrying gas from Russia into Europe. When Poland seized that pipeline, Russia didn't say anything. They didn't complain. They didn't start a fight. It just shut down the pipeline and began dismantling the whole thing, literally cutting it up and carrying away the metal to be melted down and reused for other purposes. This pipeline carried billions of cubic meters of gas into Western Europe. And it went through Belarus and then through Poland and then into Western Europe. Not only was this pipeline an energy lifeline for Europe, it was kind of a symbol of like working together and mutual support among all those countries that were involved, that were benefiting from that. However, Europe's sanctions against Russia, Europe's inability to come to good working agreements with Russia, and the constant hostility toward Russia have resulted in a true crisis. You know, they did it to themselves kind of crisis. When groups of greedy or immature nations build infrastructure, food systems, banking systems, and energy systems in one another's backyards, as if everyone will always get along, they're putting everyone at risk. The globalists were doing exactly that. They were building everything in such a way that no one would dare defy the controllers at the top. And if they dared, they could be shut down as punishment. Well, now as the globalist system comes apart, we see exactly the same kind of punishment being used on one another as countries struggle to reassert their power and sovereignty. And they end up destroying or sabotaging pipelines, cables, infrastructure. Who pays the price? We, the people. And this is why it is so important for us to pay attention to what is happening in our governance systems. No one wants to end up in the middle of winter with no gas for heating. And that is the situation in Western Europe now. Number 15. On an early morning at the very beginning of January, I was lying in bed after awakening and I saw something that surprised me. It was that in the spring, and I hope I'm wrong about this, maybe as early as the end of February, the government may try to confiscate silver. However, nobody complied. A time frame was given to turn in the silver, after which it was going to be declared illegal. But even with that threat, the response of everyone to the government was, nope, get your own silver. You aren't getting mine. You people making the rules have not proven to be trustworthy, and I'm not going to give you my silver, then have nothing to stabilize or support my own life. While this standoff was happening, the price of silver was fluctuating wildly, and it dropped quite a bit. Number 16. A couple of days later, again, lying in bed right after awakening, I saw that JP Morgan Chase Bank went under, taking two other banks with it. One was Citibank, and the other was a bank whose name I didn't catch. So I had not even been thinking about the big banks and was a little surprised to see Chase going down. I thought I must have seen something wrong or something I didn't interpret correctly. But later that same day, I saw a video saying that JP Morgan Chase had missed paying their margin call, which is technically a default. I wrote to Bix Weir and asked him if he had heard that Chase missed its margin call. But he wrote back and said, quote, JPM has $4 trillion in assets. It was hard to see how they could ever not meet a margin call. Lots of FUD flying around, which there is, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, FUD. So I don't know what to think about what I saw, other than it was quite a surprise for everyone. It happened very suddenly in February or March, and the two banks that took with it constituted what looked like the end of an era. Number 17. A big fight is taking place in the background of crypto. Some people want to collapse crypto and confiscate the cash these coins represent. Others want to use the crypto system as a new way of structuring a financial system. The cryptos that survive, I saw quite a few that didn't survive, but the cryptos that survive will be the ones that have not been taken over by people with the old money attitudes. What good is crypto if it has been sliced, diced, and gamed into the same old patterns as the Federal Reserve note? Trump will make a huge effort to make a smooth and soft transition to a new financial system, an expanded system that is still based on the dollar for a while. However, the new system will be digital, and there will be perks for going digital, and it will have gold backing. The dollar will eventually be done. Paper will be worthless, including paper silver and paper gold. Number 18. Trump can often be heard to say the Fed should lower the interest rate. When he says things like this, He's not really telling the Fed what to do as much as he is telling the people what has to happen to get rid of the Fed. Lower interest rates mean the Fed has a hard time staying alive. It looks to me like Trump is trying to take down the Fed and get rid of it. Number 19. Guess what? Our government has finally declared there will be no more welfare for illegal aliens. And since the end of the Chevron clause, government offices have no way around the no welfare rule. That Chevron clause allowed various agencies to interpret the rules however they wanted, but that is over. What's more, in the past, an illegal alien could ask someone to sponsor him so he could get into the country. Lots of people were willing to act as sponsors because they knew that as soon as the person they were sponsoring was settled in the U.S., that person was going to apply for welfare and all the benefits. Now things have changed, and sponsors may be forced to pay back all the money the illegals took from welfare, food stamps, Medicaid, and so on. That is a game changer. Wow. 20. Another piece of good news is that something has shifted in a subtle way, and there are signs that negotiations to end the Ukraine war are happening in the background. When France, who had been pushing and pushing for continuing the war in Ukraine, suddenly said, "We need to talk to Russia." And then other European leaders suddenly changed their attitude toward Russia. That says that something is shifting in a positive direction. Europe has wanted the war to continue because if it ends, the deep state will be finished. Since the deep state has had many European countries by the short hairs, all those countries kept saying they wanted the war to continue. Now something's different. So let's hope things keep moving in the right direction. Number 21, I'll close with something regarding the reality we live in. Occasionally, I hear people exclaiming in fear or shock that something spooky or unusual occurred in a particular location. The most recent was from an archaeological expedition in the Ural Mountains of Kazakhstan. 2 workers went for a walk one morning, and one of them spied a circle marked plainly on the ground and stepped into it. Immediately, a mist began to gather around her feet and float upwards. She felt odd. She had the perception that she was all the way across the valley and could no longer see or hear the person she had been walking with. As soon as she stepped out of the circle, things returned to normal, although she could not explain what had happened. I think it's important for us to begin to understand that everything is frequency, and the entire reality is maintained through the stability of the frequency set we are in. The frequency set determines the consciousness and rules of the reality. The young woman who stepped into the circle stepped into a location where an unusual mix of frequencies existed. I call these areas hybrid frequency zones. Very unusual things occur in these hybrid zones. Because the frequencies in these zones are different, the rules of reality are different. The young woman's experience is a perfect demonstration of one of those hybrid areas. Some zones amplify hearing. Sometimes they expand seeing. Some are portals to other dimensions or other locations in the cosmos. We live in a most amazing reality, and we've barely begun to explore and discover what is possible here. Instead, we huddle like frightened rabbits, trying to prevent change, and in doing so, we end up obstructing our own evolution to becoming advanced beings. So that's it for this look-see. For those who are watching or listening for the first time, the look-see is a brief look at what's happening in our world and where the trends are headed. Reality is not fixed. It's dynamic, and it changes according to what we are doing with our consciousness. Nothing becomes real until we make it real. We make a choice. We take some kind of action. We put something together or take it apart. Those are the decisive actions that determine the outcome and the timeline. Of course, once we set something in motion, it takes a lot to make it go in another direction. And that's exactly the reason for looking ahead. If we don't like the direction things are going, we can make appropriate changes in a timely way or prepare for what may look inevitable. If we see something we like, we can put some conscious attention on that outcome and help it along. It's important to look around, assess what's happening and where we are going, so you know whether or not you need to do something different. Thank you so much for listening, and I wish you all a warm and beautiful month. Keep your eyes open, keep your wits about you. We'll see you next month. Take care.